everyone. Thanks so much for joining today, and thanks to GRIMMCon for the opportunity to speak with you all. I'm going to jump right into the conversation. So welcome to my talk, Control Validation Compass, Intelligence for Improved Security Validation. My goal for today is to provide you practical workflow guidance for starting to better apply intelligence to your security program to drive improvements within it and help better measure those improvements. My name is Scott Small. I have a background in intelligence analysis, risk management, and open source investigations. And most recently, I was working for a major intelligence vendor within their customer success team. So what that meant is I was out there having conversations every single day with our clients who were largely medium and large size enterprises, as well as government agencies, around the challenges that they were facing in trying to apply intelligence to their security programs. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to speak with you today because most of what I'll be touching on is derived in one way or another from conversations I've had with our clients out there in the field, learning their challenges and trying to find some solutions for getting around them. Much of what I'll be speaking about today will be relying on and relating to the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base. So I want to quickly level set with everyone and just provide an overview of what is MITRE ATT&CK and what are its greatest strengths. I really see a huge intelligence value and applications from MITRE ATT&CK for driving improvements in security. Again, what is the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base? It is quite simply a catalog of adversary behavior. It allows us to pinpoint unique adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, and gives us a common language to be able to reference back to those across teams in different organizations, maybe within a single organization even. Just a few more details. The way that you also often see the information in MITRE ATT&CK presented is in this matrix view. I know this is a fairly grainy image, and that's kind of intentional. We don't need to worry too much about the details for right now. What I mostly want to highlight in these matrix views is the very first row within a matrix. These are known as MITRE ATT&CK tactics. These are essentially the end goals or objectives that an adversary would try to be accomplishing when they carry out a cyber attack. Arranged vertically in the columns beneath those headers are what are known as techniques and more granular sub-techniques. These are essentially just the ways or means specifically that adversaries go about conducting cyber threat activity. I want to now walk through one specific example of the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base, and again, emphasizing the real value that I see it providing in allowing us to bridge the gap between those kind of higher level strategic objectives that adversaries might be trying to accomplish and the very specific and granular ways that they are carrying out this activity. So I'm highlighting here on the matrix one specific MITRE ATT&CK technique. It's known as impaired defenses. This simply refers to ways that adversaries try to disrupt our defensive operations, perhaps turning off security logging functions, or actually even messing with and modifying those logs themselves. Again, MITRE ATT&CK allows us to pinpoint and refer back to this specific adversary behavior. One of the additional benefits of MITRE ATT&CK is in drilling down into pinpointing and identifying specific behaviors. We're able to oftentimes see details as granular as which command lines are adversaries using or which processes are they calling to conduct these activities. So here you're seeing an example of that. This is actually a search that you can deploy within a SIM tool, a security logging and aggregation tool that allows you to detect the use of the impaired defenses technique. What this is doing is looking for specific instances of command lines being used to actually turn off a popular open source ransomware antivirus tool. So that was one good example of showing kind of the granularity of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. But at the end of the day, in reality, we as defenders are not often seeing just one instance of a specific behavior within our logs and the information in front of us. we're in reality seeing very many potential techniques or behaviors scrolling across our screens all day long. So this just starts to be a little bit more representative of what we would experience in the real world. The good news is that just like we had previously, we oftentimes have these really granular details. And again, command lines, processes, files that are used by adversaries to perpetrate cyber threat behavior. We often have these details for a very large portion of the overall MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And you're seeing this displayed now on the slide. I've intentionally kind of made this a little bit busy because at the end of the day, we almost have a little bit too much information than any of us could really reliably kind of dig into and start to learn the nuances of all these specific techniques. Oftentimes, if you're going to be running these searches, or really this is logic that it's allowing us to detect these adversary behaviors, in reality, if you want to run these in a large or even medium-sized enterprise environment, you're oftentimes going to be needing to do some customization according to the unique nuances of your environment and how much noise you have going on, or even what access to log information you even have. You really kind of need to dig in oftentimes and create some customizations here. So quite simply, the way that I see kind of best meeting that challenge is by prioritizing which techniques we want to dig into and investigate a little bit further. And now I'm kind of representing that in this visual with maybe some prioritized techniques appearing in the darkest blue. This allows us, of course, to focus in and really kind of clean up and improve maybe some of these detection rules that we want to deploy within our own environment and create those unique customizations that are needed according to our own organization. In an ideal scenario as well, we're also going to be testing those new detection rules and controls that we put in place. And I'm highlighting this now on the slide as well. Much of what you've been seeing along the way here, both the detection rule logic as well as these offensive security tests to test out our detections, are increasingly being made openly available via publicly accessible repositories. So things like GitHub databases, very much of this is increasingly available to the general public, which is at the end of the day, really good news for those of us who may be starting on our journey towards this entire control, validation, feedback loop. But now I want to provide just some quick metrics, kind of capturing the scale of that problem I mentioned, where we almost have too much information and detections to potentially even consider. So at this point in time, the MITRE ATT&CK matrix continues to grow, and there are now nearly 600 discrete techniques and sub-techniques within the overall knowledge base. On top of that, there are nearly countless implementations. So even if we've defined down to the level of what's known as a sub-technique, there are oftentimes many different discrete variations that we can use to actually run that sub-technique in a real environment. And one of the most interesting things is that I recently took a survey of all of these major publicly accessible detection rule and offensive security test repositories. And in aggregate, summed up actually well over 9,000 of these detection rules and 2,000 of the red team or offensive security tests that are publicly available right now. So again, just really kind of emphasizing the scale of the great news that we have this information at our fingertips, but how do you begin accessing it and then actually fine tuning and cleaning up these detections before you run them in your environment? We need to do some prioritization. The way that we most often saw this prioritization playing out is through the use of intelligence and ultimately culminating in what is known as a threat profile or a threat model. And so we won't get into all the details of building a threat profile in today's conversation, but what I'm highlighting here with the text at least are some of the specific components that are most often taken into account when you're building a threat or risk profile. So certainly you would want to be aware of potentially which adversaries exist in the world today and which are most likely to target you. But then many more kind of internal facing factors. So what is your actual visibility into the logs and data sources within your own environment? And what do you actually have access to? Are you able to aggregate those in a single place? Additionally, within the kind of internal space, what is your actual coverage of your security controls. And if you're able to align that with the framework such as MITRE ATT&CK, what does that kind of distribution of coverage actually look like? These are all factors that ideally should be taken into account in a full, robust risk profile. So in working with our clients in building these profiles, coming from a threat intelligence background, we're of course going to be focusing pretty heavily within that upper left corner of which adversaries exist in the world today and which ones might be most likely to target us. At the end of the day, a lot of it really came down to which adversaries are we seeing targeting organizations like ours, and a lot of that came down to an industry basis. So which threat actors and malware have we seen recently targeting maybe our most immediate industry peers, the companies that look most like us, as well as which ones have targeted the industry generally. So in processing through all that information and intelligence, we could ultimately summarize this in a visual like what you're seeing on the screen now. This is kind of a heat map, and the most notable or top priority threat actors are appearing in the upper right corner of our screen. I've got some links throughout here to good publicly available resources that can help you kind of take some of the steps to build visuals and profiles like what you're seeing on the screen right now. So this is great to know. We've got a nice maybe short list in the upper right-hand corner of 5 to 10 top priority actors, for example. What can we do with that information? Well, we can then pivot on that short list to potentially look for the specific tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs or adversary behaviors associated with that short list of top priority actors. The way that we most often would run these exercises is by aligning those TTPs with the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base, and that gave us the ability to consistently refer back to the same techniques and sub-techniques that we were observing. So what we've got now is this nice heat map visual, the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, and highlighting now the top priority TTPs associated with our top priority actor and malware groups. So this is also still great information to know, and this is a pretty nice visual. You can throw this up on the screen, and a lot of folks will maybe be able to identify at a super high level what we're actually talking about. The techniques in the brightest red are, for some reason standing out to us and probably more notable. But what can we actually do with that intelligence now that we know the top priority TTPs? This is literally a question that I was posed many times originally in working with clients through these exercises, when the exercise would basically stop with this visual. So from here, we wanted to take some additional steps and help our clients start to operationalize this TTP intelligence. Let me walk through a little bit of what that looked like. So in this case, the client organization was utilizing the Splunk SIM technology, again, log aggregation and normalization tool. So what we can see, and this is all publicly available and accessible, is Splunk within its GitHub repository actually provides quite a few of these detection rules and search logic that you can run within that solution to be able to detect instances of adversary behavior. And I'm highlighting some interesting things that are included within this detection file on the screen right now. So at the top, we're seeing the actual discrete search logic, just like we were seeing in my original MITRE ATT&CK matrix visuals, as well as in the bottom left corner, the MITRE ATT&CK techniques that were kind of tagged to this rule, meaning this rule is intended to be able to recognize instances of this behavior if we have that log data and sources within our own environment. So taking a step back and pulling down all of these detection resources available on the Splunk GitHub repository, we can start to aggregate and essentially count up, align with MITRE ATT&CK, which techniques and sub-techniques are there the most detection rules for within this specific resource. On top of this specific tool, the client organization in this case was also utilizing something known as Sigma rules. This is simply a third-party standardized format for writing detection rules that you can then convert and start to deploy within tools like Splunk or Elasticsearch or many others. So very much like we were seeing previously, there is a publicly available Sigma rule repository. And we can pull down all of the data and the rules within that and start to, once again, visualize and aggregate at a large scale. Where are we seeing most of the detections or the highest concentrations of them, all aligned with the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base, having that here now. What I'm highlighting here as we continue to progress along with throwing some data in these progressive columns is a very simplified way of kind of starting to get a sense of what is the baseline or out-of-the-box coverage according to MITRE ATT&CK of these various security tools and technologies and resources. I'm quickly highlighting here on the right-hand side of this slide a far more robust framework for starting to do this kind of internal control mapping. There are a few others that exist as well, and you can find those mostly publicly available. But I did want to highlight this if you're looking to go, probably several steps deeper than this simplified version on the screen. There absolutely are resources that exist that can help you on that journey. All right, so as we kept moving right, what we began to realize, and in speaking with additional clients, is that there were, in fact, many different tools and resources that exist in the world today, and there seem to be continually adding more publicly available resources that are mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base. And you're seeing this listed out on the slide. So as we move further right, we add additional SIM tools and maybe a few SOAR tools, EDR technologies, as well as a bunch of openly available repositories for detection rules. On top of that, my point about wanting to go out and test in a safe manner that these detections are in fact alerting as you would expect them to, there are many publicly available repositories for those red team or offensive security tests as well. And it kind of just kept expanding from there. So at a certain point, I realized with my massive spreadsheet that I nearly recreated the matrix, and I almost stopped there. That's, of course, everyone's end goal in cybersecurity is to create the matrix. But I decided to keep persisting on and building out this sheet. Didn't want to give up there. And what this ultimately culminated in, I'm very excited to be able to share this with the group on the line today. Basically open sourcing and making available all of these aggregated mappings and many of the discrete resources that kind of form them or are behind them, putting it all into a web app and a publicly accessible resource for you all to be able to access. And I was excited to be able to kind of publicly publish this not too long ago. And so the tool itself is called the Control Validation Compass. And here's the quick URL to go start at least accessing the web app version and start playing around with this data. So end of the day, what is Control Validation Compass? It is an open source tool pointing cybersecurity teams to, as I mentioned, those well over 9,000 publicly accessible technical controls, things like detection rules, as well as kind of higher level policy controls. A lot of frameworks and resources out there in that regard as well that align with MITRE ATT&CK, as well as those well over 2,000 offensive or red team tests to go check and validate those detections that you put in place. Everything included within the Control Validation Compass resource is explicitly aligned with MITRE ATT&CK techniques or sub-techniques. So ATT&CK really does kind of form the core and central, the center of essentially this tool here. So just a couple of real quick screenshots. The tool is very much live and well, and I encourage you to go check it out and start playing around with it. I hope that it's pretty intuitive to at least start dipping your toes into. But what you can do on the very first landing page is just perform a lookup by the MITRE ATT&CK technique, sub-technique, or its plain text name, and immediately return all of the detection and policy controls and offensive security tests that are aligned with it. So when we first released the tool, we simply were providing the mappings and then some additional written guidance around how you can navigate through all these various repositories that contain the details behind, again, the rules and the tests. We've now already rolled out a few improvements to start to point you back directly to the underlying rules and resources. And we're going to keep building that out over time just to make it that much simpler for an end user to be able to start grabbing and actioning some of these resources. But this is at least a high level, a quick way of kind of summarizing everything that exists within these repositories around a given MITRE ATT&CK TTP. From there, we can start to expand out even a little bit further and start to identify potentially all of the resources that exist for a variety of tools. So now we're not just looking for a single technique or sub-technique, but actually for multiple at once. And the way that this page works is you get to toggle on and select potentially which of these tools or third-party data sets you're using within your own environment right now, and get the complete listing of the mappings across all of those resource sets. And then the final piece of this, which I certainly find the most interesting and I hope can kind of continue to lower the barrier of entry towards applying threat intelligence towards your security improvement efforts, is the threat alignment page. What we see here on the left-hand side is very similar to what we were seeing before. You get to pick and choose which of the controls you might be using within your own environment, or you can certainly take kind of just a global view and show me everything in aggregate. You can check all those boxes and just start to see all the data that exists. But the really key component of this is over here on the right-hand side, the threat intelligence dropdown. This allows you to input a threat intelligence data file and allow you to ultimately output just the controls and resources that exist for the MITRE ATT&CK TTPs contained within your threat intelligence input. And by this, I mean, we have some supporting resources linked on the site. You're seeing that right here. The way that this data is intended to be formatted is MITRE ATT&CK provides an open source tool called the Attack Navigator that is really designed to allow you to visualize and start to more easily navigate, as it says, around the quite large MITRE ATT&CK matrix. You can populate that user, that tool. They have a user interface that allows you to click and select different techniques and start building one of these heat map views that I was showing previously. You can then export that data into a JSON format. And in speaking with quite a few clients and others in the community who are somewhat familiar with this tool, came to realize that this is actually a pretty quick and easy way to create, again, kind of a portable file that allows you to essentially take and carry around threat intelligence and use it in a few different ways. So by dropping in one of these Attack Navigator layer files, as they're called, directly into the tool, we can run this, the line it up button, and we'll immediately get that output of, again, just the controls and testing resources for the specific TTPs that matter most to you. So you could build one of those threat profiles, build a nice heat map, export the data from the navigator, and then start to surface the detections and tests around specifically those top priority techniques as they're defined for you. Just to add a little bit more detail and nuance around this, I'll of course be sharing the slides afterwards, and I have a ton more of those supporting resources that will take you through in much more depth some best practices for actually building these threat profiles and starting to generate relevant intelligence. But a few details and what I often advise clients who are especially getting started in this journey, I want to highlight a few resources that I always recommend they go kind of check out. So the first of which is, of course, the MITRE ATT&CK website and their own database that they maintain around actors and malware or software that has been known to be carrying out threat activity in the recent past. So one thing you can do in the upper right-hand corner here is search across the entire MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base for keywords relating to industries. This is, again, a really key way that we can start to generate some findings that would be most relevant to our unique organization that we're supporting. And so you could run searches for healthcare or financial related industries or other keywords. And oftentimes, as we're seeing here, come up with some interesting results, some actors or malware that may be of more notable interest to us. On top of that, this is a tool produced by the CERT organization within Thailand. Very similar, kind of just a database of actor and malware groups, and they actually contain specific taggings for all of their profiles for these groups that align with certain industries. And so this is another very user-friendly way of searching across a fairly large data set for industry-based threats that might matter more to you. Certainly government advisories, as well as just other vendor reports. We're increasingly seeing these reports aligning explicitly with MITRE ATT&CK TTPs. And so this is a really great resource for everyone to start to kind of generate and see those T codes that might be appearing. And then finally, maybe even just some very generic kind of open source searching. But I do have at least one tool that I can recommend that kind of makes that process a little bit smoother and can cut through some of the noise that you might be seeing just in a generic web search result. So this is a custom search engine that you can utilize, specifically drilling down and running your search keywords against a very large number of cybersecurity specific resources. This is potentially a good way, as you're seeing here. You can run a MITRE ATT&CK technique or even its identifier, its T code, within a search database like this, and potentially come up with some recent relevant findings. This is where you kind of know exactly generally what you're looking for, but you want some additional supporting data around it. All right, what I'll close with is giving you, in addition to going out and finding some of these resources on your own, as a way to promote ease of use around the Control Validation Compass tool. I've started to publish a number of additional examples of these layer files, threat intelligence, that you can start to drop into this tool if you don't want to go through all the steps of trying to build those attack navigator layers yourselves. So there's even one pre-populated directly within the tool that you can just immediately click line it up and start playing around with the data. But beyond that, if you want a few readily available examples, I'll point you to my GitHub repository around cyber adversary heat maps. Essentially what I've been doing here, and I'll try to maintain this for the foreseeable future to the extent I can, is some of the recent roll-up reports from government agencies, as well as threat intelligence vendors that are explicitly looking at MITRE ATT&CK TTPs. I've started to kind of aggregate some of that data. And so you can see just a handful of recent reports. I'm going to keep building this out. But for example, the very first example here is coming directly from that Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency recent report around Russian state-sponsored and criminal cyber threats to critical infrastructure. If you even just scroll through this report, you're going to see a number of references back to the MITRE ATT&CK matrix and even the website itself. Many of these links will take you to the MITRE ATT&CK profiles for these major Russia-based cyber threat actor groups. And if you follow along all those steps, you can pretty quickly come to see quite a few discrete actor groups and malware groups that are explicitly being called out in this report. This is very recent, very fresh, and quite honestly, generally pretty relevant information for a lot of organizations that exist right now. So what this data ultimately looks like is some of this JSON structure again. These are MITRE ATT&CK navigator layers that I went ahead and created, and I'm just saving. It's all based on publicly accessible data. I've got the source information right in here for you as well. But you can go now take these again, drop them into that threat intelligence tab within the Control Validation Compass, and start to surface some of the actual operational controls and tests all aligned with these specific adversary techniques. So I think it's just hopefully one more effort to give you, some handy resources to start actually playing around with this data and hopefully better applying intelligence to your security efforts. So I'll close out with my final slide, which again will be shared, these resources to help guide you along the way. And I truly appreciate the time and attention, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.